idiosyncratic, absurd, innovative, comical, and unconventional. These are a few of the descriptors I have heard to describe musician, singer-songwriter David Beck Hansen, more commonly known as Beck. An artist whose recorded output includes 4 EPs, 67 singles, 42 outside collaborations with other artists, and 14 studio albums, and this doesn't include soundtracks, another recorded miscellanea. When I think of Beck, there are a lot of words I might use to describe his music, but in the end, I always find myself saying, he kind of reminds me of the Beatles. Hear me out. Very early on in my own personal music journey, I started listening to the Beatles. Now, the Beatles definitely understood how to craft likable pop songs, but songs like Strawberry Fields Forever, I Am the Walrus, Tomorrow Never Knows, and A Day in the Life went above and beyond all of that. Songs like these made me realize that there were no rules and that pop music could be anything if you allowed it. As the decades wore on, though, I kind of started to forget about this until Beck came along, and I was reminded all over again. I distinctly remember the first time I heard Beck. It was 1994. I was at a local coffee shop that hosted a weekly open mic night. I signed up for a spot to play and was waiting for the evening to get started when I heard a song play through the venue's sound system. It was so unusual and different from anything I had heard before, and yet it was also instantly catchy. It was a strange but compelling mix of blues, hip-hop beats, and Indian sitar music. And it had this insane groove that immediately made me want to move. As I listened, I watched 2 young stoner kids grooving to it and asked myself, who is this? And when a song makes me ask this, it's because it has stood out above the noise. It's because it has piqued my curiosity enough to want to hear more. I would quickly find out that the song was called Loser from the album Mellow Gold. Mellow Gold was Beck's 3rd studio album, an album he described in interviews as a K-Tel record from hell. And for those too young to remember, K-Tel Records was a company that released a series of compilation albums released mostly during the 1970s. These albums would cram 20 or so hits onto a single LP disc and featured contemporary hitmakers of the day, often titled with the word gold, i.e. pure gold, 20 solid gold hits. And today, they would be best described as the 70s era version of Now That's What I Call Music. As for Mellow Gold, I loved the whole conceptual idea that each song on the album was recorded by a different artist, with Beck masquerading as each one. Starting with the nonstop groove of Loser, the album jumps from genre to genre. There's the hysterical folk parody Nightmare Hippie Chick, the disturbing country western Truck Driving Neighbors Downstairs, which featured audio of a real fight that took place in Beck's apartment complex. Mellow Gold also featured 70s-influenced dance tracks like Soul Suckin' Jerk, Beer Can, and Sweet Sunshine, and the punk metal screamo track Everyone's Out to Get You, Mother. The album closes with what I describe as an ethereal acoustic trance folk drone track called Black Hole that feels like it could have been recorded by any number of 70s hard rock bands that were inspired by Led Zeppelin. The whole album is a playground of musical ideas. In many respects, this album reminded me of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper album in that each song was a completely different color from the one before it. With Sgt. Pepper, the Beatles said, "What if we were a different band?" They said this in order to free themselves of expectations that fame and success had brought down on them and be more creatively free. By referring to Mellow Gold as a K-Tel record from hell, Beck also freed himself from all commercial expectations and also allowed himself to be creatively free. As a result, I now refer to Mellow Gold as the lo-fi Gen X Sgt. Pepper album. But the Beatles comparisons don't stop there. When I think of the Beatles, I think of a band who pushed musical boundaries. Not just their own musical boundaries, but the boundaries of the pop music world around them. And they managed to do this and still remain commercially viable. Looking back on Beck's recorded output, I feel like he did the same thing. He took conventional music boundaries and trends of the day and didn't just push them. He twisted them and still managed to stay commercially relevant. Now, Beck's music is sometimes described as quirky and maybe a bit odd, but a close study of his recorded output shows a strong influence of traditional Americana music conventions like blues, country, and folk, fused with more contemporary conventions of pop and rock from different eras. With all of this walking musically hand in hand with whatever musical trends were in the air when he was recording. Prior to Mellow Gold, Beck released Stereopathetic Soul Manure, an anti-folk album wherein he would write and record a song like Rowboat, a country western song so authentic to the genre that Johnny Cash covered it on his Rick Rubin-produced album Unchained. On the same album, he would also release Satan Gave Me a Taco, a comical epic of one man's nightmare journey after eating a tainted meal. His follow-up to Mellow Gold, One Foot in the Grave, and released the same year, by the way, featured the traditional blues and folk of He's a Mighty Good Leader and The Land Beyond. It would also feature the beautiful melancholy of Hollow Log, a Dylan-esque song of wanting and desire, and a disturbing track like Ziploc, a song that features gross instrument detunings and heavily distorted vocals. I played this last track for my partner one day, and she immediately asked me to turn it off. When I asked her why, she said, because it's disturbing, that's why. And she was right. Ziploc is music that sounds like it's boiling within the head of a psychotic madman. On the album Odelay from 1996, Beck would combine the 60s R&B sound of Stax Records with hip-hop. And 1998's Mutations featured, of all things, Beatle-esque psychedelics on tracks like Nobody's Fault But My Own. Midnight Vultures from 1999 was a glitzy dance album that featured Prince-style funk. He followed up Midnight Vultures and surprised everyone with a very somber singer-songwriter acoustic album titled Sea Change in 2002, an entire album themed around the heartbreak of losing a partner. He would achieve this feat again with the Grammy Award-winning Morning Phase in 2014, an album he referred to as a companion piece to Sea Change. Each album saw Beck playing with various musical conventions and also breaking them down at the same time. In between Sea Change and Morning Phase, Beck would release The Information, Guero, and Modern Guilt. All three are really good, and I could discuss them in detail also, but I think you are getting the point. And besides, I really want to jump ahead and discuss what I refer to as Beck's anti-album, Songreader. An album of songs comprised entirely of printed sheet music. Songwriter was an album you had to perform to hear, and he invited musicians to perform their own interpretations of the songs and post them. And perform them they did, with scores of musicians posting their versions on SoundCloud and YouTube. Eventually, a commercial audio release featuring different artists, including Beck, performing the various tracks from Songreader was also released. Beck's music could sometimes be described as a little bit off-kilter, a little off-center, and it was often sardonic with a sense of humor, yet he was taken seriously by music critics and still got played in dance clubs. After winning Album of the Year and Best Rock Album for Morning Phase, Beck released a fun dance album with Colors in 2017. This was followed by 2019's Hyperspace, an album that I will admit disappointed me a little bit, but that's okay. Even the best artists misfire now and again. Throughout their career, The Beatles dabbled in all manner of musical genres and even made up some new ones along the way, and yet they always still sounded like the Beatles. They also achieved the rare feat of staying commercially successful at the same time. I feel like Beck did the same. He dabbled in all manner of genres and made up some new ones in the process, and yet he managed to somehow always sound like Beck, and all the while he remained commercially successful. Over the decades, Beck has managed to always be the musical artist that he wants to be. He hasn't had to compromise his musical identity to fit into the mainstream, and yet he has managed to also stay relevant to the mainstream as well. And that is why Beck reminds me of the Beatles. Because in my opinion, no other artist since the Beatles has better demonstrated that there really are no rules in pop music in the way that Beck has. And that pop music can be anything if you allow it to be. This is TJR, and those are my thoughts. Let me know yours. Please leave a comment. I'll be curious to know what you have to say. As always, if you like these videos, be sure to hit like, hit subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon so you never miss a video. A big thank you to my Patreon supporters. Patreon supporters do receive exclusive weekly videos not available on this planet. If you'd like to be a Patreon supporter, please go to patreon.com/TJR the original. If you can't, that's okay. You can always leave a one-time super thanks for any video that I post here. And if you can't do that, I understand. You can just show your support by clicking like. Clicking like helps a lot, and it is free to do. Everybody, thank you so much for watching, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.